The harvest must begin now.
You have no authority here.
Then watch your fields drown.
12 noble women were each given 1 day to prove they could manage the Duke's estate. The only woman who warned him that the harvest was in danger was dismissed before sunset. By midnight she would be the only person standing between Ashcombe and ruin. Duke Henry Ashcombe had never believed that beauty, music, or a generous dowry could prepare a woman to govern one of England's largest estates. His father's death had left him responsible for 4 villages, thousands of acres, and hundreds of families whose survival depended upon the decisions made inside Ashcombe Hall. Unfortunately, every relative he possessed had reached the same conclusion: Henry needed a wife. 12 unmarried women from distinguished families were invited to spend the harvest season at Ashcombe. Society called it a house party, but everyone understood its true purpose. Henry was expected to select the next Duchess of Ashcombe before winter. Instead of judging the women through embroidery, dancing, or polite conversation, Henry announced an unusual challenge. Each lady would receive 1 day to make decisions concerning the estate. She would be given a limited budget and asked to handle household expenses, tenant complaints, necessary repairs, and preparations for the coming harvest. "I do not require a wife who can merely entertain guests," Henry told them. "I require one who understands that every decision made in this house affects someone beyond its walls." The announcement delighted the guests, though most appeared to misunderstand him completely. The First Lady ordered new curtains for the Great Hall because the existing green velvet made the room appear unfashionable. Another reduced the servants' meal allowance and proudly announced that she had saved the estate £20 in a single afternoon. Lady Cecily Pembroke arranged an extravagant dinner for visiting landowners and declared that improved morale would naturally increase productivity. She spent nearly half her assigned budget on flowers. Miss Clara Fenwick watched all of this from a quiet seat beside her aunt. Clara had not been invited as a possible bride. Her father's estate had collapsed beneath debt 3 years earlier, leaving her with no property and no dowry. She had come to Ashcombe only as the companion of her widowed aunt, who suffered from poor health and disliked travelling alone. Yet while the other women laughed over their decisions, Clara studied the estate reports placed on a side table. She had managed her father's small farm during the final 2 years of his life. She understood the cost of seed, the danger of delayed repairs, and the terrible arithmetic that decided whether a tenant family would eat through winter. On the 6th morning of the challenge, the chosen participant became ill and refused to leave her room. Henry found Clara examining a map of the southern fields in the library. "You seem unusually interested in my drainage channels, Miss Fenwick." Clara looked up. "They appear unusually neglected, Your Grace." Henry raised an eyebrow. Clara merely placed 1 finger against the map. "The lower fields drain into this stream, but the last inspection report is nearly 18 months old. My estate manager assures me the system is sound. Then I am sure he will not object to someone verifying it." There was no flirtation in her voice, only calm practicality. Henry surprised himself by saying, "The lady assigned to today's challenge is indisposed. Would you take her place?" Clara glanced toward the rain gathering faintly against the windows. "I was not invited as a candidate. Consider it an examination of your criticism rather than your suitability." A small smile touched her mouth. "Very well." Unlike the previous women, Clara did not begin in the household office. She requested a horse, a plain cloak, and permission to speak directly with the tenants. By noon, her hem was muddy and her gloves had been abandoned somewhere near the western wheat field. Henry followed at a distance with Mr. Silas Crowe, the estate manager who had served Ashcombe for nearly 20 years. Clara examined the grain between her fingers, then asked an elderly tenant when the wheat had begun to bend. 3 days ago, miss," he answered. "Mr. Crowe says we should wait another week." Clara looked toward the darkening western horizon. "A week may be too late. It has reached the point where heavy rain will flatten it. Weather is not managed by nervous speculation." "No," Clara replied. Clara had done so without raising her voice. She continued toward the storage barns where she counted the grain sacks herself. The official ledger recorded nearly 300 more sacks than she found inside. "Where is the remainder?" she asked. Crowe did not hesitate. "Transferred to another warehouse." "Which one?" The Eastern Warehouse. Clara requested the delivery records. Crow's expression cooled. Those documents are private estate accounts. His Grace gave me authority for the day. To make household decisions, not search the records of loyal servants. Henry stepped forward. Let her see them. The ledgers were brought from the office. Clara compared entries, dates, and transport costs while Henry watched her expression grow increasingly troubled. Several wagons had supposedly transported grain to the Eastern Warehouse, yet no drivers were listed. Other shipments appeared twice, each carrying identical weights on different dates. Crow stared at her. That would be reckless. The wheat is ready, the drainage channels are blocked, and a western storm is approaching. If the river rises, the southern fields will flood before tomorrow morning. Lady Cecily, who had joined them after hearing Clara was being allowed to compete, looked. You cannot reorganize an entire harvest because the clouds appear unfriendly. Clara turned to Henry. Call every available worker. Begin with the southern fields and move the grain into the stone barns. Crow opened one of the ledgers. Your Grace, Miss Fenwick entered the records room without supervision and copied confidential figures. She has also frightened the tenants with claims of disaster. I asked questions, Clara said. You challenged established authority in front of estate workers. Lady Cecily touched Henry's arm. If every guest were permitted to accuse your servants of dishonesty, what would remain of order? Henry looked from the ledgers to the man who had served his family for decades. Crow's records carried official seals. Clara had only observations made during a single day. He wanted to believe her, but belief required him to accept that Ashcombe's entire system had failed beneath his notice. You will issue no further instructions, Henry said. Disappointment crossed Clara's face, though she quickly concealed it. You are ending my day. I am ending the disruption. Crow closed the ledger with quiet satisfaction. Clara removed Henry's temporary seal of authority from her cloak and placed it in his hand. A smaller harvest safely stored is worth more than a perfect harvest destroyed in the field. The decision has been made. Yes, Your Grace. She looked toward the black clouds gathering beyond the windows. You may dismiss me, but the storm will not obey you. Clara prepared to leave Ashcombe Hall before dinner. As a servant carried her small trunk toward the waiting carriage, Mrs. Agnes Bell hurried across the courtyard. The older woman's bonnet had come loose and fear sharpened every line of her face. Miss Fenwick, Mr. Crow has locked the tool barns. He has ordered the tenants not to begin cutting until next week. Clara looked toward the fields. The wheat moved beneath a sudden violent wind, each golden stalk bending in the same direction. Then lightning tore across the western sky. Clara heard the first distant roll of thunder and understood that Henry had not rejected her warning alone. He had surrendered the harvest to a man determined to keep it in the fields. They had only a few hours left. Clara looked toward the carriage waiting beneath the archway. She could leave Ashcombe Hall, preserve what remained of her dignity, and allow the Duke to discover his mistake when the storm reached the fields. But the people who would suffer first were not Henry, Crow, or the noble guests dining beneath chandeliers. They were the tenants whose wages depended upon the harvest. Take my trunk back inside, Clara told the servant. Mrs. Bell stared at her. You are staying? Not as His Grace's guest. Clara fastened her cloak against the rising wind. As someone who knows what will happen if those fields remain untouched. They crossed the estate toward the tenant cottages as the first drops of rain struck the road. Mrs. Bell knocked on doors while Clara explained what she had seen: wheat ready to cut, drainage channels blocked, and a river already rising beyond the southern fields. The farmers listened with troubled faces. We were ordered to wait, one man said. Crow made it clear that anyone who disobeys will lose his tenancy. If the harvest is destroyed, there may be no wages, no rent relief, and no food left to protect, Clara replied. Crow won't go hungry this winter, but you will. A woman holding a baby looked toward the dark fields. My husband says the wheat should have been cut days ago. Then trust the hands that planted it. The tenants exchanged uneasy glances. They had spent years obeying the estate manager, not out of respect, but because he controlled their homes and jobs. Mrs. Bell stepped beside Clara. I've served Ashcombe since the old Duke was alive. Miss Fenwick is right. One by one, doors opened. Men brought scythes and lanterns. Women gathered rope, blankets, and baskets for carrying grain. Older children were told to stay near the cottages and keep the younger ones safe. The tool barns remained locked, so Clara ordered the workers to use whatever they owned personally. Within half an hour, the southern field glowed with lantern light. At Ashcombe Hall, dinner had barely begun when Lady Cecily noticed the moving lights through the windows. She crossed to the glass. What are they doing? Crow looked once and immediately understood. Miss Fenwick is encouraging rebellion. Henry rose from the table. He ordered his horse and rode toward the fields, with Crow and several estate guards behind him. He found Clara standing on a wagon, directing workers toward the lowest ground. Stop this immediately. The cutting slowed. Every face turned toward him. Clara stepped down. If they stop now, the southern field will be lost. You were ordered to leave. I was dismissed from your challenge. I was not released from knowing what will happen. Henry dismounted. These people answer to Ashcombe, not to you. Then use your authority, your grace. But use it before there is nothing left to govern. The rain began falling harder. She has frightened them with false claims. If the grain is cut too early, the estate will lose thousands of pounds. Clara removed several folded pages from her cloak. These are the figures I copied from the storage records. Your ledgers show more grain than exists in the barns. Crow did not look at the pages, because the remaining sacks were transferred east. There are no signed wagon records, no driver names, and no receipts confirming their arrival. The papers were misplaced. 300 sacks do not become less missing because the paperwork is careless. A murmur moved through the workers. Crow's voice sharpened. She is publicly accusing your estate of theft. I am asking where the grain went. Henry took the pages from Clara. Rain blurred some of the ink, but the rows of numbers remained visible. He wanted to examine them carefully. He wanted time to summon clerks, question drivers, and compare every account. The sky offered none. Still, the humiliation of being challenged before his own tenants pushed him toward the wrong instinct. Return to the hall, he told Clara. Her expression changed. Henry, it was the first time she had used his name. The intimacy of it unsettled him more than the accusation. This has gone far enough. No, it has barely begun. She pointed toward the river. Water had already crossed the edge of the lower bank. If the bridge is lost, the wagons cannot reach the stone barns. If the drainage channels overflow, the southern field will be underwater by morning. Crow gave a dismissive laugh. The bridge has survived stronger storms. Clara looked at Henry. The manager's answer came too quickly. The labor was postponed because of cost. Clara held Henry's gaze. The accounts show that the work was paid for. Silence fell across the field. For the first time, uncertainty appeared on Henry's face. Crow moved closer. Your Grace, this woman has exceeded every privilege you granted her. Allowing her to continue will teach the tenants that any outsider may overrule your command. Henry looked at the waiting workers, the gathering flood, and Clara's rain-soaked face. She turned toward the tenants instead. Save what you can. Do not wait for permission from people who will not be hungry when winter comes. Then she walked away through the rain. Henry watched her until the darkness swallowed her figure. The workers slowly lowered their tools. Return to your homes, Crow ordered. The harvest will begin next week. Reluctantly, they obeyed. On the ride back to the hall, Henry discovered that Clara had left one small notebook on the wagon. He opened it beneath the shelter of the stable. The pages contained more than copied totals. Clara had drawn a map of the drainage channels and marked the southern bridge in red. She had listed families whose winter food depended entirely upon this harvest. Beside several wagon entries, she had written, no driver recorded, no market receipt. Bridge unsafe before midnight, Henry looked toward the eastern warehouse. Bring me the transfer records, he told Crow. They are in the accounts office. No. The original records. Crow's face remained carefully blank. I believe they were moved to the eastern warehouse for storage. Henry ordered 2 guards to accompany him. The warehouse doors were locked. No clerk had the key. While Crow claimed it must have been misplaced, a young stable hand approached Henry and quietly reported that several sealed trunks had been carried into the building that afternoon. At the estate boundary, Clara reached the road leading away from Ashcombe. She should have continued. Then she heard water roaring beyond the trees. Clara climbed the embankment and saw the river surging toward the southern bridge. Half the field remained uncut, and the wagons already loaded with grain would soon be trapped on the wrong side. She turned back. Not for Henry. For the families who would have nothing if she allowed pride to carry her away. By the time Clara reached the field again, rain was falling in sheets. The tenants who had ignored Crow's order were struggling to move the last wagons toward the bridge. A flash of lightning split the sky. The eastern warehouse erupted in flame. Shouts rose across the estate. Through the smoke and rain, Clara saw a rider emerge from behind the burning building. Silas Crow was fleeing toward the northern road. Strapped behind his saddle was a heavy iron box. Clara understood at once. The storm had never been merely a risk to the harvest. The eastern warehouse burned against the black sky while rain poured over the estate. For one terrible moment, the tenants stood frozen between the fire behind them and the rising river ahead. Clara did not. "Move the loaded wagons to the stone barns," she shouted. "Leave the eastern road clear. Anyone who cannot cut must open the drainage channels, Mrs. Bell repeated the orders until the workers began moving again. Clara divided them into 3. The strongest men were sent to reinforce the bridge and guide the wagons across. Others returned to the wheat with scythes, cutting only what could be carried before the flood reached the field. The women and older children moved livestock from the lower pastures and prepared dry space inside the stone barns. No one questioned why Clara had authority. The storm had already answered that. Henry arrived from the burning warehouse with rain streaming from his coat. 2 guards had followed Crow toward the northern road, but the darkness and flooding had slowed them. He found Clara standing knee-deep in water beside a blocked drainage channel, pulling branches and mud from the stone opening with her bare hands. "What do you need?" he asked. Clara looked at him as though uncertain she had heard correctly. Henry stepped closer. "Tell me what Ashcombe needs." She pointed toward the southern bridge. Every empty wagon, ropes from the stables, men on both sides of the river, and someone with enough authority to make them obey quickly. "You have that authority, until you change your mind again." Henry removed the ducal seal from his coat and placed it in her hand. "Until the last field is safe," Clara closed her fingers around it. "For once, Your Grace, no one must question the woman who knows what she is doing." "They will not." Henry turned toward the waiting workers. "Miss Fenwick speaks with my authority. Anyone who ignores her orders answers to me." The declaration moved through the field faster than the thunder. Together, they began the work Clara had requested hours earlier. Wagons rolled toward the bridge beneath sheets of rain. Henry and several tenants secured ropes along the weakened rail while Clara directed the order of crossing, sending the heaviest loads first before the river rose any higher. Behind them, the eastern warehouse continued to burn. The rain should have weakened the flames, yet oil hidden among the records kept the fire alive. Crow had planned carefully. He had not planned for Clara. A tenant's young son sat beside the grain holding the reins while his injured father followed on. Halfway across, the river struck one of the wooden supports. The bridge lurched. The horses reared and the wagon wheel broke through the planks. "Get off," Clara shouted. The driver jumped clear, but the boy froze. Clara ran onto the bridge before anyone could stop her. "Thomas, look at me." The child clung to the seat as water surged beneath him. "Take my hand." Another support cracked. Henry seized a rope and followed her. "Clara, the bridge is going down. I can see that." She reached the wagon and pulled Thomas against her just as the horses broke free. The wagon shifted violently, spilling sacks of wheat into the river. For one suspended instant, Clara and the child hung above the flood while the broken wagon disappeared below them. The tenants pulled on the rope. Henry dragged Thomas onto the remaining boards, then reached again for Clara as another plank tore loose. She struck the side of the bridge but did not release his hand. "Do not let go," Henry said. "I had not intended to." Together, the workers hauled them to safety. Clara collapsed onto the muddy bank with Thomas in her arms. The boy was crying but unhurt. Henry knelt beside her. Blood ran from a cut above her brow. "You might have been killed. So might he." Henry looked at the frightened child, then back at the woman he had ordered from his land only hours before. There was no answer that did not condemn him. A shout rose from the northern road. The guards had captured Crow near the old quarry where his horse had fallen in the mud. By then, the fire had begun to weaken. Henry ordered the box opened before the gathered tenants and guests who had finally left the safety of Ashcombe Hall. Inside were private ledgers, receipts from illegal grain sales, and records of payments deposited under false names. Crow had been selling part of each harvest for years, then altering the estate accounts to hide the missing stock. There was also an unsigned agreement transferring several hundred acres to Lord Pembroke, Lady Cecily's uncle, for far less than their value. Lady Cecily stood beneath the shelter of a wagon, her face pale. Crow intended to reorganize several unproductive fields. "You knew he was stealing from Ashcombe. I knew he could help me succeed in your ridiculous test." Her voice rose with desperation. "He promised that if I supported his decisions, the accounts would make my day appear more profitable than the others. I did not know about the fire." Clara looked at her. "You did not ask because the answer might have prevented you from winning." Cecily's family carriage was ordered before dawn. Crow was taken away under guard. As the first grey light spread across the fields, the storm began to pass. The southern bridge was destroyed and several acres lay beneath water, but the stone barns were intact. Most of the harvest had been saved. Henry stood before the exhausted tenants, his boots deep in mud and his formal coat torn at one shoulder. "Miss Fenwick warned me before sunset," he said. "I chose rank over reason and reputation over truth." Clara stood apart from him, Mrs. Bell binding the cut above her eye. "Everything saved tonight was saved because she acted after I ordered her to leave. The failure was mine. The courage was hers. No one applauded." The silence held something more meaningful, recognition. Later, Henry found Clara preparing to depart. "Stay," he said. "Become the new manager of Ashcombe. Name your salary and your authority." Clara closed her traveling case. "You believe me now because the storm proved me right. I was wrong. Yes, I admitted it before the entire estate. And I needed you to believe I was worth hearing before the sky began to fall." Henry had no defense. Clara lifted her case. "You do not need another loyal servant, Your Grace. You need to become a man who recognizes loyalty before it bleeds for him." She left Ashcombe that morning. Several weeks later, Henry learned that Clara had accepted responsibility for a neglected northern estate. She was already establishing shared harvest profits and teaching rural women to manage accounts. Henry stood beside the rebuilt southern bridge, looking across the fields she had saved. He had believed the challenge would reveal which woman deserved to become Duchess of Ashcombe. Instead, it had revealed how little the Duke himself deserved the woman who had passed it. During the 6 months after Clara left, Henry made no attempt to replace her. He also ended the search for a duchess. The remaining guests departed Ashcombe Hall with the explanation that the challenge had been suspended. Society assumed the storm had embarrassed him into abandoning the idea. In truth, Henry had finally understood that he had been testing the wrong people. He began with the estate accounts. Every ledger was opened for inspection. The tenants elected representatives to a new council, and the money Crow had stolen was returned through reduced rents and winter grain allowances. Widows were permitted to keep their leases, and the drainage channels were repaired. A stone warehouse was constructed beyond the reach of fire and flood. Henry attended every council meeting. At first, the tenants spoke only when invited. Years beneath Crow's authority had taught them that honesty could cost a family its home. Henry did not demand their trust. He waited for it. When he finally traveled north to see Clara, he found her standing in a muddy field surrounded by farmers. She wore a plain brown cloak and held an account book beneath one arm while explaining a new system of shared harvest profits. She saw Henry at the edge of the field but finished speaking before approaching him. "Your Grace, Miss Fenwick." Her expression was courteous though carefully guarded. "Have you come to offer me Ashcombe again?" "No." That surprised her. Henry handed her a rolled set of plans. "I intend to establish an agricultural school. It will teach crop management, accounting, drainage, and estate law to tenants' children and rural women who are rarely permitted such training." Clara studied the drawings. "And what do you want from me?" "Your judgment. Not my obedience. I have discovered that the two are very different things." Clara agreed to advise him under 4 conditions. The school would remain independent. And Henry would not use her name merely to repair his reputation. He accepted every condition. Their work began through letters, then monthly meetings. Clara corrected his plans without softening her criticism, and Henry learned to ask questions before defending himself. They inspected fields together, argued over budgets, and spent long evenings designing lessons for people who had never before been invited into an estate office. Slowly, Clara saw that Henry was no longer seeking approval for one heroic act. He was changing the way Ashcombe was governed. A year after the storm, the estate celebrated its first harvest festival under the new system. The fields produced more grain than they had in decades, and every tenant family received a share of the profits. Before the village, Henry announced Clara as the first director of the Ashcombe Agricultural School. He praised her experience, intelligence, and authority. He did not mention marriage. That evening, after the music had faded, Henry found Clara standing in the harvested field beneath a pale autumn moon. He held the silver pocket watch once used to measure each lady's single day of responsibility. "I believed one day was enough to judge a woman's worth," he said. "You needed only one night to prove how foolish that belief was." Clara accepted the watch but did not open it. "Have you come to offer me another position?" "No." Henry's voice softened. "I am asking whether you would help me build Ashcombe's future, not as my employee and not as the winner of a test." Clara looked at him steadily. "I will not become your duchess because I saved your harvest. Then become my wife because I finally learned that I was the one being tested." For several moments, only the wind moved through the empty field. Henry did not reach for her or fill the silence with promises. He waited, as he should have waited before dismissing her judgment a year earlier. "I will keep my work." "Yes." "My authority at the school?" "Yes." "And when I disagree with you, I expect you frequently will." Clara smiled. "Then yes, Henry." Years later, the old pocket watch hung inside the agricultural school. Beneath it was a small engraved plaque: "No life should be judged in a single day." She became his wife because he learned to respect her mind before asking for her heart. And the fields, once nearly destroyed by pride, continued feeding hundreds of families, not because of a competition to find the perfect duchess, but because of the woman everyone had dismissed before sunset.